What's up YouTube, Car Boss here, where I talk about cards, money, investing. Today I'm going to talk about a question that I get a lot of late, which is about grading your Marvel cards. Now this video is not going to talk about what specific cards you should grade or how you should grade your cards, but what role grading plays in the Marvel card world today and why is it different from sports cards, right? But before I begin, if you like this sort of stuff, do give me a follow by subscribing to this channel. I'm getting pretty close to the 1000 mark and it's much thanks to all your support. Alright, let's go. So I touched about Marvel grading in several of my earlier investing videos where I explained briefly about how early stage grading is for the Marvel cards hobby. Now, not that grading itself is new, right? It's just the acceptance of grading. It's still rather in its infancy in this market, and I'll explain why in a little bit. But firstly, I want to talk about why do you grade your cards in the first place? And it's not just specific to Marvel, but to all collectibles for that matter. The primary reason is authentication and encapsulation, right? So you can see that its card is protected in a nice hard seal, so it's kind of like a protection kind of thing. So when grading first started out, people wanted to authenticate old collectibles and at the same time put it in a nice, capsule or casing, where the condition can be preserved for a long period of time and therefore maintaining the quality. So of course, this process of authentication involves an assessment of condition, where in those days you would say fair, good, near mint, and so on. But these days, condition grading, as we know, it's associated with a number from 1 to 10, and 10 being the highest or the best. I'm not going to dive into the different grading system by different companies. They all kind of mean the same thing, but just speaking their own different language. But what is important is that people learn to understand that there is a premium attached to this authentication / grading service, as there will be a cost involved, not just for the fees, but acquiring a collectible that's in a very strong condition. Okay, so when you look at sports cards in the early days, grading was exactly what I described, but as time went along, people saw grading as an opportunity to capitalize on the premiums and started to grade modern cards which came fresh out of pack. Of course, that doesn't mean that all cards fresh out of pack will get a 10, right? There is a higher possibility, of course, when you compare to something that's 10 or 20 years old, which have been kept unprotected in your basement or your attic somewhere. But all the premiums are still massive on old graded collectibles, in high grade versus that of modern cards. Okay, so let's jump to Marvel right now. When you compare Marvel to sports cards, despite Marvel originating in the early 60s, card collecting in this industry probably only boomed in the late 80s or early 90s, where stuff like the 1990 Marvel Impel was massively overproduced. So meaning if you take my explanation earlier about grading older cards, you'll probably be looking as far back as 30 years with a set that's likely produced in the millions, and sealed boxes of Marvel 1990 is still available today. And this will affect the grading premiums on your outcomes, and I'm going to explain why. So while the individual cards in the 1990 Marvel Impel can be bought for just a few dollars, right? The grading fees today itself is not cheap, such as PSA, which just reopened their $50 economy service. There is premiums on PSA 10s, but these are extremely difficult, even right out of the pack, due to manufacturing issues like the centering. So meaning you can be already, say, $60 in on a card with uncertainty that whether or not you can cash in with a 10, or maybe break even with a 9, or even lose money with an 8. But all these are, the sports cards investors' mindset, and doesn't necessarily translate to how Marvel card collectors and investors today think, right? So in my last video, I talked about lots of Marvel OG guys owning probably 95% of their PC in raw cards, and just a small fraction of it graded for reasons likely the card is super valuable, or maybe it's up to be put on display. Perhaps it was the only copy available that they could find to add to their PC at the time, so there was no raw copy, so they just bought a graded one. And going forward, this trend is likely to continue, where OG collectors would still shy away from graded cards when there is expectation to pay a very high premium. It's like kind of say it's okay to pay $10, for a pack fresh mint black suit Spider-Man, for example, right, in this 1990 Marvel Impel. But if you say that I'm going to pay, let's say, $300 for a PSA 10, that's a different story, right? I could easily use the difference to buy other things to add to my PC. But let's say this PSA 10 was only, let's say, $80 or just $100, right? I might just shell out a little bit more to get a gem mint slab, right? The mindset is just different. So I'm not saying that there is no benefit or demand in grading Marvel cards, but you have to consider what are the expectations in the premiums and subsequent returns. Now, these numbers are not necessarily automatic, like 2x or 3x your cost. Okay, so the second thing you probably want to know is what sort of cards is worth, or what sort of graded cards is worth paying a premium for, which in turn lets investors know what kind of cards that should be sent for grading. Of course, the theory is that the harder the card grades, the higher the premium. And you can see all the examples already in recent sales where super premiums are being paid for high grade PMGs, or say the 1994 or 1996 Marvel Masterpieces. These in high grades are extremely hard to come by. Now, don't let the population count fool you for the case of Marvel cards. Population counts today are generally on the low side because people hardly send their Marvel cards for grading. So if you're paying a premium for a graded Marvel card, be it a PSA 8 or PSA 9, right, you would have a specific reason to do so and not solely be blinded by the current pop count, right? So some people say that it's pop 2 or pop 4 or whatever, right? So it's low for that reason, okay? And that can easily change if suddenly there's a surge in submissions. So just take PMGs, for example. Just not too long ago when I first started looking into this market, I didn't really keep a specific track, but if I had to guess, the population counts at that time was rather on the low side and would have surged tremendously in the last 12 to 24 months. Okay, maybe between 3 to 4 folds from the original starting point back in early 2020. As for the case of PMGs, there are valid reasons to have PMGs graded specifically because they're so condition sensitive, right? And the difference between, or the price difference between a PSA 7 and a PSA 9 can be very, very significant. So even if you put those cards right side by side, they may not appear to be different in our naked eyes. Hence, that's where there's an appreciation for the premiums between the differences in the grade. But the right card, the right grade can command the big dollars, and that's exactly what we saw with the $132,000 Spider-Man Blue sale. And that's why after that, we haven't really see any big dollar sales that follow up, because it really takes something special to ask for that kind of money, not just simply taking a card, sending to PSA, getting back an 8 or a 9 and thinking that you could ask big money, right? So the purpose of this video is not to discourage you guys from grading. I love grading. I grade all the time, right? But there are some cards, specifically Marvel cards, which you invest in, and it's better to leave them raw. Don't forget, when you send a card for grading, it takes time, a long time perhaps, right? And circumstances may be completely different by the time you get your cards back. Just take sports cards, for example. Modern base cards were really a thing back in 2020, and people sent the cards in by the thousands. Now, 1 year later, when these cards start to come back, PSA 10 gem mints, hardly cover the price for the raw that you paid back then, let alone the grading fees 1 year ago. You guys can check out a video that I did on sports cards where it's titled 60% gem rate, but right, it's a situation whereby my submissions actually had a 60% PSA 10 gem rate, okay? But as a submission, I barely broke even on the entire sub. It can be really frustrating at times. Okay, that's all I have for you guys today. I hope you guys found today's video useful. See you guys in my next video. Thanks for watching. Carboss out.